Hello, tile friends. Welcome back to another episode of Tile Money, the podcast where we discuss the business of being a tile contractor. My name is Luke Miller, your host. I'm a licensed tile contractor in the state of California. Today I have Fred Hueston with me. Fred Hueston has a long history in the tile industry. He's a stone forensics. He's going to tell us about his stone forensic business. He also grew up in the trade, so that's going to be a lot of interesting conversation we're looking forward to. Tile Money is sponsored by Lady Crete International, as well as the National Tile Contractors Association. So thank you to my sponsors for making this podcast available and possible. Really appreciate you. Fred, how are you today?
I'm doing great, Luke.
Good. Thanks for being a guest on my show. And by the way, thank you for interviewing me. Audience, if you don't know, Fred has his own podcast called The Stone and Tile Show. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And you can find that everywhere where podcasts are available, as well as he does a very cool thing where he does a live interview, and you can call in and have a question or have some input. And when I was interviewed, we had a fun person call in, Ben Santos.
Yes.
He had some good input there. So that was fun.
It's always fun.
So Fred, to start with, tell us about your background in the tile industry. How did you get introduced to this industry?
Well, it's kind of interesting. My dad was a tile setter and actually a handyman as well. So I remember growing up as a kid, here, son, go mix this bucket of grout, go mix this bucket of mud. Of course, back in those days, we're talking 40 some years ago. I mean, mud was the only thing out there
Right.
at the time. So doing that for a number of years into my teenage years, I decided that I never wanted to see another piece of tile or stone again in my life.
Yeah.
So I went to college,
Yeah.
and my dream at the time was to become a marine biologist.
Okay.
And I ended up graduating, not with a marine biology degree, but a biology degree, nevertheless.
Okay.
And my dad had gotten sick. He had gotten cancer.
Uh,
My mom was a housewife, and she started a cleaning business.
okay.
And when I say a cleaning business, it was basically her cleaning houses. It wasn't
Yeah.
this huge, conglomerate type business. And my brother and I, my brother's a musician, we decided, we need to get mom something steady. So we got her some doctor's offices to clean.
Okay.
Lo and behold, I had graduated by that time. I was in the lab at the University of Florida. And my mom called and she said, "Son, I've got this marble floor and it's got these stains on it, and I don't know how to get them out." And I said, "Mom, I'm a scientist. I'm not in the business anymore. I don't remember. I don't
Yeah.
even remember if we ever did that." So it kind of sparked my curiosity. So what do you do as a scientist? You go to the library and you research it, right?
Yeah.
Well, I went to the library and found nothing on stone, nothing on tile. I mean, from setting it to installing it to cleaning it, nothing at all. I mean, there was a couple of journals in Italy and Germany, but nothing in the US. So it sparked my interest. So at the time, I'm living in Orlando. And for you guys listening in Orlando, you're going to love this story. At the time, there were 2 fabricators in the entire city. Now
Wow.
there's probably 100 plus.
Yeah.
But anyway, so I went to the local fabricator and I said, "You got some, scrap marble and granite?" And he said, "Yeah." So I took my entire garage and I laid what we call a Palladiana terrazzo pattern, broken pieces of tile all in my garage, and ended up buying a floor machine and started practicing.
Really?
I already knew how to set the material. So I said, "Well, let me practice, refinishing this material." One thing led to another. I left the university. I know this is a long story. I left the university,
I love it.
went to work for Disney World in their
Okay.
research department, and was totally bored with what I was doing. So I started a stone restoration business on a part-time basis. Just, minor stuff here and there. One thing led to another. I started experimenting with different techniques. And one of the things that I think sets me apart than most contractors at the time is I was always curious as to why.
Yeah.
And at the time, learning to do that type of work was like trying to extract the formula from Coca-Cola out of Coca-Cola. No one wanted to tell you their secrets. Thank
Mhm.
God that's changed.
What
Uh,
years was that?
Oh God, we're talking back in the probably early '80s.
Okay.
So it was
Okay.
a while ago.
Yeah.
And so anyway, I always wanted to know the why. Okay, you go to someone that knew how to polish marble, for example, and they would say, well, this is how you do it. And I go, well, what's happening there? What's the chemical reaction that occurs when powder goes on there? No one knew. It was
Really?
always, well, I was taught this way, and so it kind of piqued my curiosity. And I ended up in the business. I ended up in the full-time business. Ended up getting Disney as one of my major accounts at the time.
Oh,
And
wow.
I was at a trade show, and there was a lady there that you probably don't know who she is, but her name was Dorothy Kinder, and she was the editor of a magazine called Building Stone Magazine.
Okay.
And I was talking to a bunch of people, just a bunch of contractors like us, just hanging around talking, and we were talking about this process called recrystallization or crystallization, a polishing technique for marble. For those of you not familiar with that, and she came up to me and she said, "Fred, would you mind doing an article on what you were talking about?" And I said, "Sure, that's not a problem." So I did an article, and that kind of launched my consulting career.
Right.
The article got published. People started calling me, asking me for advice. I was still contracting at the time, so I was juggling that business as well as trying to juggle all the calls I was getting from various contractors throughout the world.
How large was your main business was tile and stone work, correct?
That's
Installation?
that's correct. Well,
Were-
I started out in well, actually, at that time, I started out in restoration.
Okay.
That developed into installation because I already knew how to do that from my dad.
Okay.
So we were doing small projects. We'd go in and restore something, and someone said, we want to add some tile to this room. Can you do that? Of course,
Okay.
we can do that.
Okay.
And then I ended up with the fabrication shop.
Okay.
Years later, I ended up
You
in
had
the
several things going. How large was your company? I mean,
The restoration company was probably the largest. I had upwards of, at times, a dozen guys working,
yeah.
all over town, and we actually ended up developing a niche for historic stone restoration. So we ended up going outside of the state of Florida, all over the place. We were in California, we were in LA, we were up in Oakland, up in the
Okay.
Midwest and Columbus. So, we ended up doing a lot of historic work there too. But
Very cool.
anyway, to make a very long story short,
Well, I
uh,
love the story. I love the story, Fred. I really do.
well, thank you. To make a long story short, people were started asking me, can you come look at this project and we'll pay you? And I go, you want to pay me?
Yeah.
Well, wait a minute. I'm not used to that.
Yeah.
So I learned a valuable lesson, and that is, it took me many years to learn what I learned, especially today, being in it
Sure.
as long as I have,
Yeah.
is to, make sure you get paid for what you know.
Yeah.
People all the time say, well, you just sit on your butt or you go look at something you get paid for. I said, but you don't see those 20, 30 years beforehand of all that work I put
Yeah.
into it, the late
Yeah.
nights, the 40-hour days,
Yeah.
et cetera. So,
Well, and the curiosity too. I really want to highlight this very important part that you mentioned was you were curious to know why things worked or why
yes,
they didn't work.
yes,
And that resulted in your researching and your thirst or hunger for knowledge. So really
exactly.
important aspect there, tile friends. Be curious. We have all these systems today. The old systems, mud bed, water in, water out, topical waterproofing, and different things, different ways to install tile. Be curious to know why it works and if it would work for you, if you can combine something or not. And it goes much further than that. But I just want to highlight that curiosity. So many times we just, like you said, we do it because that's the way we were taught.
Right.
Reminds me of a story of the Christmas ham. I'm sorry, I'm just going to tell this real
Go
quick.
ahead. Go ahead.
Christmas ham, the lady would always, it was a recipe passed down for like 3-4 generations, and the lady would always cut the ends off, and put it in the oven. And this went on for generations. And one day the daughter said, "Mom, why are we cutting the ends of this ham off and giving it to the dog and putting it in the oven?" And she said, "Well, it's because that's the way my mom did it." And so the daughter went to her grandmother and said, "Why are we cutting the ends of the ham off?" And the grandmother said, "Well, you see, we started that because my mother's stove was so small, we couldn't fit the whole ham in." So it's like, there's no point to
Yes.
doing it. But, at the time there was. So anyways, go back to now your story. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay, man. And you bring up a good point as well. But anyway, that curiosity led me to more and more consulting work. And it got to the point where my consulting work was getting, I was getting more and more work than I was actually getting contracting work. And I said, well, I've got to start thinking of my future. And for you guys that are out there doing this, I mean, you need to in your business think about, you might be young, might be some 20-year-old whippersnapper. You're out there, you're a go-getter.
Yeah.
That's all fine and dandy. We were all there at
Yeah.
one time. But you need to be thinking about the future. You need to be thinking about, what am I going to do next? What am I going to do when my knees give out, which we all know what that's like in this business.
Yeah.
So that's what I was thinking. I was thinking, what am I going to do next? And the consulting opportunity came along at the right time. My knees were starting to bother me. I had trouble getting up, from the knee pads, and uh, I I ended up in a long story short, I ended up making more money in a consulting business. The
Okay.
consulting business led into training. And I started an organization which is now defunct, called the National Training Center for Stone and Masonry Trades, where we actually were the first so-called, I don't know if you want to call it a legitimate trade school, but basically a seminar-based school where we taught installers, fabricators, restoration contractors. And then the economy took a plunge back in, what was that, 10 years ago, something like that. And I had to close that particular business down, but I still ended up doing private training. I'd go into fab shops, show them how to improve their facility, train restoration guys. And today, to put an end to the story, I do a seminar once a year, as well as some private seminars if they're asked for. And then the rest of my business is purely stone inspections, stone and tile inspections,
Okay.
where I get to see, people don't call me and say, Fred, look at this great installation. I get to see all the bad stuff.
Sure. Sure.
So, and one of my main complaints there is that, what you had just said is, some of these installers, not everybody, there's some great installers out there, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
They're not asking, what am I doing wrong? They
Right.
finish the project, they get their check, they don't see it until there's a problem. Or maybe they don't see it
They
at
don't see it
all.
at all.
And then
Yeah.
I get called in, and all of a sudden they're getting slapped with a lawsuit or a complaint. And so
Yeah. Not a
I'm
good situation.
I'm sometimes a bad guy,
Yeah.
when I go on a project, but not all the time. A
Yeah.
lot of time, in some cases, it's not their fault.
Sure.
So
Well, that's
so that's
great.
how I ended up here. And then, of course, I started the radio show about a year ago.
Yeah.
Primarily, which is, our shows, I think, complement one another very well, because yours talks the business side, mine is more the technical
Sure.
how-to side. So it's a
Yeah.
good complement.
Well, I've picked up some business notes on your show as well. So I think it's important that we kind of interview each other like we're doing, and
Yes,
also continue these conversations. I mean,
absolutely.
like you said, in the '80s, it was kind of a closed knit, secretive thing, but here it is in 2020 almost, and we couldn't have we're so far from that. With the internet,
Yes.
knowledge is key, now, and that's the key to everything. To growing.
And
Uh,
years ago, I never thought that would happen. I'm so happy that's happening. I mean, the
yeah,
NTCA, the Natural Stone Institute, all those organizations are out there educating, as well as individuals. I mean, many of the people you and I have
yeah,
interviewed, I mean, they're very happy to share their knowledge. And I think
yeah.
that's what we're both here to do.
Well, unfortunately, these failures, they hurt us all. So let's talk a little bit more about that. As your
Sure.
business, what does that look like day to day? I mean, are you working, full time? Are you flying around the country? Do you have a lab? Tell us a little
It
bit about that.
it varies. People say that all the time when they look at my fees. They go, "Wow, you should be driving a Bentley right now with the money you're making." But they don't realize, and this is any consulting business, not just my business, but anybody doing the consulting work. It's not. It's a full time job, but it's not necessarily full time work.
Okay.
And let me explain that a little bit more. I mean, there'll be times where I'll get a call, say in Miami,
Yeah.
and there's an inspection down there. Well, that's an entire day for me. That's a
Okay.
3-hour drive. It would be like you going to maybe San Diego.
Yeah.
It's a long drive. You do the inspection. The inspection may take you an hour, then you drive back. There's a day killed. But that doesn't stop there. Now you got to go back, and you've got to write the report, which can take some time. You may have to do some research. You may have to order lab tests. I don't have a lab. I use independent labs.
Okay.
So it comes in waves. I mean, there'll be times where I'm never home, and there'll be weeks at a time where I'm home, and
Yeah.
that allows me to play catch up. So
Yeah.
It's kind of like what my day in a life is. I get calls constantly. I answer emails constantly. So even when I don't have an inspection, I'm on the computer answering calls, prepping for the radio show,
Yeah.
things of that nature.
Yeah. What is how many folks are doing what you're doing in the United States?
There's not a lot of us out there. I could probably name on maybe one and a half hands how many people are actually doing this on a full-time basis.
Right.
So a lot of the guys are out in California, believe it or not.
Mhm.
My buddies like Greg Mowat, Don Halverson, I'm sure you know those guys. They do the work, and a lot of what's interesting. If I could tell you an interesting story about what we do in the tile industry, and how people sometimes are afraid to approach the consulting aspect or the inspection aspect, is that there are a lot of so-called, and I'm trying to say this nicely, professionals out there that think they know about stone and tile,
Yeah.
i.e., a lot of engineering firms that are
Mhm.
out there that I compete against. And quite honestly, they don't know jack shit about what we know.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, which is interesting. So I always win against them, but
Okay.
I always tell guys out there, anybody thinking of going into this business, is don't be afraid of the law. Don't be afraid of attorneys, because guess what? They know the law. You know your work.
Yeah.
You know tile. You know stone. You know installation, fabrication, restoration, whatever your expertise is. You know more than they do, and that's what you do as an expert. My outlook on an expert, or what I think an expert does, is they become a teacher. They
Mhm.
teach people, what the issue is, and that's the beauty of consulting. I don't have to go in and say, "Guess what? You screwed up this installation, Mister Installer."
Right.
That's not my job. My job is to tell you what went wrong.
Mhm.
I wasn't there. I didn't see you do the installation, so I can't tell what went on. And all kinds of things can go on,
Yeah.
as you know.
Yeah.
So
Are you in court often?
Uh, again, it's up and down. There'll
Okay.
be months I do a lot of depositions, because most court cases don't go to court.
Yeah.
I could probably, I would say on average, I may end up in 2 or 3 court cases where I actually go to court a year.
Yeah.
The rest of the time, it's all depositions, and after the deposition, they usually settle.
Okay.
After the deposition, or work something out. So,
Okay.
but it's really fun. I mean, I've
Yeah.
been doing this now for over 30 years, and it's to this day, it's still fun.
Oh, that's good. That's really good.
If
You
I could
know
tell you, go ahead.
Yeah, go
I
ahead.
was gonna say I got an interesting story I think your listeners will like, and that is, you know, going back to, a lawyer called me. I'm afraid I gotta go do a deposition. I don't know how to do a deposition. And I remember the first deposition I ever did was years ago, and these attorneys called me and they said, what had happened, just real briefly, is a slab fell on a worker,
Yeah.
and the worker got hurt, and they wanted me to come in and know, how do you handle slabs, safely. And I got called into this deposition, and I always say that if I would known what I know today then, what it was like, my first deposition was like, well, you know what? You're going to go into this room with these 3 attorneys, and they're going to question you for 8 hours. That's how long
Yeah.
my first deposition was an entire day.
Wow.
Or I could take Luke and Bill and let them go out back and beat you up. Which one would you have taken? And I said, I'll go with Luke and Bill,
Yeah.
because I'll feel the same, but that only lasted a minute.
Yeah.
But once and it goes back to what I said, once you understand that you know more than the attorneys do, it's a piece of cake. It actually becomes fun at that point.
Yeah. How do you establish your credibility? Is it just a practice of time?
Well, it's like any business, reputation, obviously,
Yeah.
in the consulting field, you have to be careful not to become what they call a hired gun.
Yeah.
I'm going to hire you, tell me what I want to hear. And there's been jobs I've turned down because, hey, I can't help you there, for
Yeah.
whatever reason. But the reputation obviously helps getting the word out. It takes time to build a consulting business.
Yeah.
Uh, Secondly, writing articles. I mean, I'm sure you've seen my
Publish.
articles, and
Yeah.
I do the Stone Detective and the Slippery Rock Gazette every month.
Yeah.
I've written for Stone World magazine, all the journals. So just getting out there. And today, social media is key.
Sure.
Most of my marketing today is social media, and that's both for the Stone Show and uh, the consulting business as well.
Yeah.
It's almost 100%, other than reputation and people seeing my articles. Almost 100% social media. It's big today.
Yeah. Yeah. So years ago, I looked into this business, and I quickly decided it wasn't for me. I mean, I was very young, wet behind the ears still,
Yeah.
but and I think it's one of those things. I mean, you really have to be in this industry for a number of years.
Yep.
What's one piece of advice, and then let's mention that the annual training seminar you give. But what's one piece of advice you would give somebody who thinks maybe they're at the stage in their life where they're curious to get into this business? Would you give them?
Education.
Education, yeah.
Educate yourself. I mean, whether that education is sitting on the computer and going to Google and looking at YouTube videos, it's still education. Attend seminars, join the associations. And like we said a minute ago, the information is out there. I mean, you can call, and that's what's great about social media is that now you can talk to someone. I'm in Florida. I could talk to someone in California. You're not afraid to share your secrets
Yeah.
because I'm not in direct competition with
Sure.
you. So it's a good thing. So I think that is the key. I had a friend of mine many years ago said, education is the sell.
Yeah.
And it applies to your customer as well. Educate your customer. Customer is going to hire you based on what you know or what you perceive to know, I guess you could say. So it's no secret. So I would say the key would be education.
Okay. Now, tell us real quick before I forget. I don't want to end this podcast here. I want to jump back in time a little bit and talk about when you were doing more work with the tile and installation and restoration.
Absolutely.
But first, before we forget, put a plug in for the annual seminar that you have and location and date.
Sure. Every year I do a stone inspection and troubleshooting seminar, and I do it in Las Vegas. It's along what do they call that show now? It used to be called Stone Expo. Surfaces, I think
International
they call it.
Surfaces event.
Event now. So I do it at the same time as that. It's a week-long seminar.
Okay.
It's a certification seminar, so there's a test at the end. And we basically talk about failures in stone and tile installations. And that not only includes flooring, it includes countertops, it includes some exterior work as well. So basically anywhere you find dimension stone, it's a failure. What's ironic about the seminar, what I find interesting anyway about the seminar, is that I've been doing it now for probably 10 plus years. I do 1 or 2 a year. That's it. It's a very small class, 8 to 10 people max.
Okay.
Very few of the people actually become inspectors.
Okay.
They're there because they want to learn more. They may be an installer. They want to know, why am I having this failure?
Mm-hmm.
They may be a restoration contractor, a fabricator. So it's open for anybody. This
really
class, this class coming up in January is full. I have filled it up, but I plan on doing another one probably sometime mid-year, June or July. And I would just say keep an eye on my website to see when those dates will be announced.
Okay, great. Well, I've always said the riches are in the niches, and this is definitely a niche. I mean, there's less than 12 people, kind of practicing this full time in the States. So this is a cool niche.
Yes.
Now, Fred, let's jump back in time to when you had a lot on your plate. I mean, it sounds like you had a restoration company, installation company, and then you were kind of starting to dabble into what you're doing today, the forensics.
Yes, right.
How do you handle so much at once? What systems and processes do you remember having in place to help you with that workload?
Well, it does get overwhelming. I mean, I'll be honest with you, it was a learning curve for me as well. But what I learned to do is to compartmentalize everything.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of, even though they were under the same umbrella, to kind of look at them separately. And then having, I know a lot of guys out there are 1-2 man operations, but having key people, and obviously I was the guy that did the consulting and the inspection works, but I brought key people in to run my other portions of the business. And quite honestly, that's a tough nut to crack sometimes. I mean, you got to go through some people to find the right individual.
Yeah.
If you're lucky enough to have family involved, well, I mean, there's some issues with that as well.
Sure.
But I mean, there are a lot of successful family operations.
Proceed with caution, right?
Exactly. Proceed with caution. One mistake I did make, and I don't want to harp on it, is that, and one thing I want to tell anybody out there is to be very careful with partners.
Mm.
You might have a best buddy you went to high school with, and this guy would make a great partner. And all of a sudden, you get into business with that person, and there's a whole nother side of that person that comes out. So, I'm not saying don't do it, but I'm
Yeah.
saying approach it with a lot of caution
Yeah.
and put everything right up front. And I think the best way to handle that would be, what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? Fill those weaknesses and keep those strengths, and vice versa. So,
Yeah. Yeah. That's a tough nut to crack right there. I mean,
yeah,
a partnership can be such a powerful thing. I mean, we could list some companies that, are better because of partners,
right.
but it's at the same time, it's one of the most cautionary tales out there for businesses. So
Exactly.
that's an
Well,
interesting.
and it's like hiring employees. I still get asked to this day, what do you look for in an employee?
Yeah.
And they're surprised at my answer. And my answer is, I want to hire, especially in the trades. And what I mean, not only the tile and stone trades, but any trade.
Right.
If you're hiring a new employee, look for someone with no experience in that field.
Okay.
And they go, well, that's stupid. I go, no, it's not, because at least from my experience has been, when I hired someone that came from another company or had that experience, I had to undo all their bad habits.
Yeah.
So what I would do is I would ask them, and of course today we got to be careful what we ask people in an interview. But one of the things I used to ask is, what did your father do for a living?
Hmm.
What does that have to do with anything? Well, I grew up with a handy dad, so you know, I could put an angle grinder in someone's hand and tell you in 2 seconds whether they have mechanical skills or not.
Sure. Sure.
So if their dad was a carpenter, an electrician, or some type of construction trades, that was one key for that person to be a perfect employee to train, because they pick up on it
Yeah.
really, 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 really quick. So uh, I don't know, forget why I was telling you that story, but
Well, no,
yeah,
I'm glad you brought up employees. That's one of the toughest things today. It seems like, I mean, probably forever, right? But
yep, yep,
today, I mean, we continue to have this discussion over and over again in my Facebook group and when I talk to other contractors. And I'm excited. I've recently gotten back from Total Solutions Plus, and I learned some of my heroes, or some of the people I look up to and admire in this industry. I kind of had an insight. They shared what they're doing in their companies to attract employees. And like you said, a lot of them start from the ground up, right
right,
out of high school, or whatever the case might be. And it's interesting because I've preached before that one of the quickest ways to kind of scale is to find somebody who knows what they're doing, a seasoned, vet. And
right,
so, because that was my experience, since then I've kind of had to think about that, because I kind of realized I got lucky in a lot of ways with the guy I
right,
found, my employee. And then in a lot of ways, I think back and I realize, you know what, he did have habits that I couldn't change. A few habits that for the whole time we worked together, I just
right.
couldn't change, and I just had to accept them. So, in other words, if you really want to build a company culture and you really want to instill, your ways, start young. I think that's solid advice.
And another important thing to look at too is that if you hire someone, I don't want to sound negative on this, but if you hire someone that's, say, been doing it for 10 years, they're at a level of, here I go again, same thing every day in, day out.
Yeah,
Where a new person is learning a new skill,
yeah,
there's an energy there that you won't find in an experienced person. They
interesting.
make
Yeah,
you may have to put in more time in training that person, but you'll end up having that person do it your way,
yeah,
and they're excited to do it.
yeah, yeah. Really good. How do you keep good people when you find them?
Well, it's funny. I've been lucky, and I was fortunate enough in my company, for the most part, to find good people. And I thought the simplest way to keep people is with 2 words: thank you.
Mm,
And it's unbelievable, because what I found is
appreciate.
that if you give them bonuses all the time, which I'm not saying don't do that, you have to be careful with it. They now expect bonuses.
Right.
And it's the same with customers. I mean, if you throw something in, especially with commercial work, we used to throw things in all the time, and then something would go wrong with that free thing, and they would forget it was added in, and
Yeah.
now they're complaining about it. So you have to be careful with bonuses. But I think just being appreciated and thanking them on a constant. I made a point that every single day when my crew came back, hey guys, great job, thank you. You know, I'm not saying, again, I'm not trying to say don't give bonuses. Bonuses are a good thing. We all like bonuses. We all
Yeah.
like extra money, but be careful with it. But I think that is the main key to keeping your employees, is to be appreciative of those employees. Without them,
Yeah.
you'd be back to being a one-man operation, and you'd be in the consulting business.
Yeah.
No, but seriously,
Yeah.
that's, if you want to grow, that's
No,
very,
it's a good point. Express appreciation. It's a powerful. Everybody needs it in our
yeah,
lives. From our personal relationships and work as well. And I like the fact that you brought up. Don't just give out bonuses and expect people to stick around. A lot of people, are if a lot of employees are content. Sure, they would like increases in their pay,
right.
but they might be looking for something other than money. They might be looking for appreciation.
Yep.
They might be looking for, maybe they need to clock out 2 hours early on Wednesdays so that they can go to their kids' baseball game. And if you can make that happen, then they'd be loyal. That would make their years ahead so much more enjoyable, because now they're
Right.
more active with their personal family. It
Right.
might be something really personal like that. So just conversation, appreciation, say, hey, I really appreciate all your hard work. Do you need anything from me? Things like that. I like that you brought that up, Fred. Thank you.
Yeah. Keeping an employee doesn't cost you money
Okay.
if you do
Yeah.
if you do it right.
Yeah. It costs a lot of money to keep retraining.
Exactly.
Yeah. What's one piece of, lesson, one important lesson that you've had to learn the hard way over your years?
How much time we have? You want one. I gave this some thought, and I actually brought up some of them already.
Mhm.
But I would say that if I had to narrow it down to one thing or one piece of advice or lesson that I would learn over time, and again, it's very simple. Go with your gut.
Yeah.
Go with your gut in everything. Go with your gut with employees. Go with your gut with customers. I can tell you many stories, and I'm sure you can too, and everybody else can out there, about certain gut reactions you had with a
Yeah.
customer, for example, and you ended up taking that job and ended up being a nightmare.
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't know what it is, whether it's astrology, whether it's voodoo, or what it is, but I every time I've ever gone against my gut in business, it's been wrong. And every time
Yeah.
I've gone with my gut, it's been right. So if it feels right, do it, I guess, would be my motto.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, that's a solid piece of advice. We do not want every customer.
No.
No.
And I know that gets difficult sometimes with, when you're desperate, when you're looking for work, but, an interesting story, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
Um, a lot of guys, they get to the point in their career, or their business, I should say, where, they get and how do I say this nicely? They get, I can't do that job. It's too small.
Yeah.
I ain't gonna bother with it. A small foyer, forget it. I need to do an entire house, or an entire lobby. And let me tell you a story about how I ended up finding out that was wrong.
Yeah.
Many years ago, in the restoration aspect of the business, I got a call from a lady that was an hour outside of where my office was. And she called and she said, we have this brand new floor. It has a grout film on it. It needs to be, repolished. Can you come down and take a look at it? And I said, sure, fine. She goes, but you got to come on Saturday when my husband is here. I said, fine. So I go an hour away on Saturday. I look at her floor. It just has, the guy didn't clean up the grout. I said, a quick polish, we could take care of it. So she goes, well, my husband said he wants the floor crystallized, and I'm not going to get into that, but for this story,
Okay. So he had done some research on a process.
well, he did a lot of research on this
Yeah.
process, and I said, well, I don't recommend doing it. Here's an article on it, blah blah blah. She goes, oh well, can you discuss this with my husband? And I said, sure. He's out playing golf. Can you come back at 3 o'clock? This is 9 o'clock in the morning, so I'm an hour away from my office. So I either got to go all the way back to my office, come back at 3 o'clock. And this is a job at the time was maybe $500.
Yeah.
Okay. Very small job. So I bit my tongue. Okay, I'll come back. So I found something to do. Came back at 3 o'clock. He keeps me there for 2 hours talking about all the technicalities. I mean, this guy really knows what he's talking about. He's done his research. So if they finally said, okay, we want you to come back and do the work, and this is another problem you guys have in business. We want you there. We could talk about that if
Right.
you want. Hey,
Yeah,
but
I'd love to.
we want you there.
Yeah.
I said, okay, fine. Can we set it up for next Saturday? Now, at the time, we were working Monday through Fridays, not weekends. So I go down myself on Saturday. I do the job. She's thrilled to death. She loves it. I hand her the invoice. I hand her care instructions. She goes, well, I'm sure my husband will want to talk to you about this. Can you come back at 3 o'clock? He's out playing golf. So again,
Yeah.
I got to find something to do for a few hours,
Are you
come
kidding?
back and talk. In the meantime, I'm thinking in my head, if these people ever call me back,
Yeah.
I'm busy for the next year. Sorry, I can't come to you. So bit my tongue. He comes back, blah, 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 blah. Get my check. I'm out of there. Make a mental note. Don't ever call this lady again.
Yeah.
Monday morning. This was Saturday. Monday morning, I'm sitting at my desk, getting the guys ready to go out, and the phone rings. Now I got to tell you a quick thing before this. Before I did this job, I had been trying to get into Disney as one of their main contractors for years. Couldn't get nowhere.
Really?
I get a call from Disney on that Monday. And they said, we want to have a meeting with you about one of our hotels. Can you be there tomorrow at 9? I said, no, sorry, I'm a little busy. No, of course, I dropped everything and I'm off to Disney the next morning.
Yeah.
I walk into this room and it's a big, huge conference table with 6 suits sitting on it. And at the head of the table, guess who's at the head of the table?
Your buddy, your golfing buddy.
Vice president of Disney. Since that day, I had all of Disney's work.
Wow.
So the lesson there is obvious. So the lesson is don't always overlook those small jobs because they could lead to bigger things. Those executives, the GM guy, the Disney guy, the Coca-Cola guy, whoever, they live somewhere, and you may be called to do a small job for them, and it could turn into something really, really big. So
incredible. I that story took a turn I did not see coming.
Yeah.
That's cool.
It's a great story.
That's cool. Yeah. I've known guys in Los Angeles who they were just doing grout repair in Hollywood studios. And from there, they've worked in everybody famous, all the famous people's homes.
Yep, exactly.
Similar stuff, You mentioned, let's see, that story took me by surprise here.
Sorry.
You mentioned, how do we handle, because this trade is so artistic, and oftentimes we'll spend years building our name, building our business based on, Luke Miller, I'm going to do the work. And we get to a point where, we grow to the point where now it's not me, but it's my apprentices doing the work.
Right.
And they're qualified because I've trained them. How do we get past that customer's objection? Is it going to be you, Luke, doing the work? What do you have on that?
Yeah, and that's one thing I struggled with in the very beginning, because it was like, well, you sold yourself. You're selling your company and your services, but you're really selling, who you are. They're confident with you. They're relaxed with you. And let me tell you the progression of how I handled that. The first thing I did when I couldn't be there anymore is I said, well, what I'll do is I'll show up with my crew. I'll make sure they get started, and then I've got other customers to get to, and I'll come back and check up at the very end. Mm-hmm. That's one way to handle it. But let's say you're so busy you can't even handle that.
Right.
I would, you could either bring your head supervisor who's going to be on that job with you. Yeah. To that, which is kind of difficult to do, or be upfront with a customer. I'm very busy. I wish I could be there, but I can't be there. I might be able to stop by. It's a big job, every now and then. And that's just the facts. What else can you do? If they demand you be there, well, you have to make a decision. Yeah. Is that job worth you being there, or should you move on to the next job? And that's tough to do when you're in business. You don't want to turn away work.
Well, you made it tougher after that story.
Yeah, sorry. Absolutely. Yeah, yes. Yeah. So you should ask him, what do you do for a living? No, you can't.
But in all reality, well, nowadays you could research, probably within 15 minutes and figure out.
It's funny. I've done that. I've gone on inspections. Just last week, I was at a $40 million home.
Yeah.
And I didn't meet with the owner, but I knew the owner's name and I didn't recognize the name. So what do? You Google the name. Yeah. Oh, so that's what he does. So do the same thing.
Yeah. 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 I mean, why not? You know, the
Right.
tools are all there now and they're
Abs-
easily accessible. So why
Absolutely.
not use it to do some research who you're going to be getting in business with, you know, even if
Exactly.
it's for a week.
That's right.
Yeah. Uh, couple more questions for you. You know, another common subject, another problem is coming up with prices. We get asked this all the time. You know, should I charge square foot? Should I charge, you know, how much for a shower? How much for this backsplash? How did you come up with your prices? What advice do you have for my listeners?
Well, I mean, it's funny you should talk about price. I had someone tell me when I was first starting in consulting business, and this applies for any business, is
Yeah.
that uh, your prices. Well, how do I say this? Let me take what I did with the consulting arm. I have never ever, except maybe one time, had someone tell me I charge too much. Because
Okay.
here's the way you want to look at pricing. If you go into a car dealer and you're going to buy a brand new Mercedes Benz, you don't expect to buy that brand new Mercedes Benz for $20,000, do you?
Right.
You're going to pay a lot more money for that.
Yeah.
So people is the psychology people perceive, and I'm not saying price yourself out of the market by any means.
Yeah.
People perceive a higher price as being better quality
Yeah.
item, if you will. So, one of the things I used to when business really started going and competition started coming, and I've had guys coming in at half my price,
Yeah.
especially in the Florida market. The Florida market, especially South Florida, is horrible. I mean, they're the work that I mean, they're fabricating countertops down there for $10 a square foot.
Wow.
It's and installing tile for 50 cents to a dollar.
That's crazy.
I mean, you can't compete with that. So you have to sell your customer on the quality. You're getting the best. You may be certified. Use that. I'm certified. I've been in business for so long. And I would be willing to bet if you up your prices that you'll get not only more work, but quality work. And that's what I found.
Yeah.
I found that I'll give you an example. Just yesterday, I had a telephone call from a lady that had this historic home, and her email started out. I wish I could pull it up and read it to you. It was something out. I clearly can't afford, and it was something of that nature. And I'm looking at this house. It's an 11,000 square foot home.
Wow.
I really can't afford you to come in and inspect this poor installation. Blah 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 blah. And I sent her an email with a couple of questions, and one of the questions were, how much did you pay for this installation? It was
Yeah.
$200,000 job,
Wow.
$200,000 job. And so she started, the next sentence was, I found you, I know your reputation, you're the best there is, blah, 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 all the pats on the back, so to speak.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I wonder what this lady is expecting me to charge her. So I gave her my normal price. She goes, oh, and her exact email words were, Merry Christmas to me, meaning herself.
Yeah.
I can afford that.
Okay.
So, and it's, and I gave her, I didn't,
Sure.
I don't charge based on, I don't look at your financials and say, well,
Sure.
you make more money than this guy does, so I'm going to charge you more. I charge the same regardless.
Yeah.
And I think, anybody in the contracted business should be looking at it that way, whether they're Bill Gates or whether they're average Joe, your
Yeah.
pricing schedule should be the same. With that said, to get back to your question, I did not like square foot pricing.
Hmm.
And the reason I don't like square foot pricing is, as well as I do, if you go in to do a simple, let's talk an installation that's a 100 foot by 100 foot, and it's a ballroom.
Yeah.
Yeah, fairly simple, right?
Yeah.
But now you go in and you do that. Let's say it's a 5,000 square foot job. Now you go to a 5,000 square foot home.
Yeah.
It's definitely going to take you a lot longer. How can you possibly compare that square footage basis? You
Yeah.
can't.
Yeah.
So what I used to tell people, and this applies to installation, it applies to restoration, and it applies to fabrication.
Mhm.
Go in and price your job based on your standard stuff, your material cost, how long it's going to take you to do it, and your profit margin. This is my price.
Yeah.
If they insist on a square foot price because they're shopping, back it in.
Yeah.
This job might be $5 a square foot for the same square footage, and the next job might be $12 a square
Right.
foot for
Right.
the same. So, don't back yourself into that square foot failure, if you will,
Sure.
because it could bite you. Because, well, you know what? We decided we're going to take those bathrooms out of there, and that's another 1,000 square foot. So now you can subtract that square foot price out of there. That doesn't work.
Yeah.
It doesn't always work, as you know.
Yeah. So a couple valuable lessons. You touched on differentiate yourself from the competition. Express your history. Your professional appearance.
Right.
One thing I used was contracts. Contracts set
Yep.
me apart from almost every contractor in my
Oh,
area for some reason.
absolutely.
So I encourage all my audience to use a contract, and have it part of your sales presentation. And that's when I really started. It started clicking in my mind. It became part of my sales consultation. I would say, this is the contract we're gonna sign. And then this is why, to protect you and me. But
Right.
mostly you. So I really found that was a good sales
Perfect.
technique. Yeah.
Absolutely.
What business book recommendations do you have, Fred?
Well, there's actually 3 books that I really have found helpful over the years. They're kind of older books, but
Okay.
they apply today. The first one is called, actually, there's 2 in this series. It's called E-Myth.
Okay.
I don't know if you've heard of that book or
Oh, I
not,
love E-Myth. Yeah.
and the E-Myth Revisited.
Hmm.
Excellent, especially for the guy that's out there that is working for somebody and wants to get into their own business.
Yeah.
Maybe they're corporate. Now, I want to get into contracting. Those are two great books.
Yeah.
Second book I like is called In Search of Excellence.
Okay.
And that's by, actually, I wrote the author down because I can never remember the author's name. Is by Tom Peters. And it's pretty much a book on how a lot of these large companies like Disney, 3M, took failures and made them into successes
Okay.
on the corporate level, but can also apply to very small businesses as well. And the third book I absolutely love. It's not necessarily a business book, but it will definitely apply to business. And they actually made a movie out of this book as well. It's called The Secret.
The Secret.
The Secret.
Okay.
And without getting into it, it's you go on YouTube. I think you can even find the full length video. But it's basically uh, it's this. I'll tell you what the secret is, and you can read the book and see why. It's called The Power of Attraction.
Okay.
Attracting success.
Yeah.
And I'm sure you've heard motivational speakers say all the time that if you fail, you've attracted that failure,
Yeah.
and that's what this book is all about. So it's a great book for that. So it's a short book. It's an easy read, and if you don't want to read, look at the movie.
Yeah. Well, I like short books. I look forward
Yes.
to checking that one out. I'm a big believer in, the power of attraction and,
Yes.
thought patterns and stuff.
Yes.
Positive
Great.
energy.
Great
Sure.
book.
Well, Fred, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this interview. Where can people find you? I know you're on Facebook. Where else are you at?
You can check out my website, which is stoneforensics.com.
Okay.
My consulting service as well as the training is on there. There's a link to the radio show.
Okay.
The radio show is blog talk radio /DR Fred DRFRED. But all the links are on stoneforensics.com.
Okay.
They can send me an email if they like with any questions. Email is fhueston, that's FHUESTON @gmail.com.
Okay. All right. And I'll be sure to put those links in the show notes, friends. So you'll be able to easily find them on YouTube as well as in whatever podcast, app you're listening to.
Right.
Find those links. So, and
Great.
you're on all the same apps. I think.
Yep.
I am, Fred.
I am.
Yeah. Are you on YouTube?
Yes, I am. Actually, oh, sorry. I'm glad you mentioned that. I started a couple months ago a video blog as well. They're very short video blogs. So
Okay.
I've got like 16 of them so far. So you can check that out. And
I will.
you
Yeah.
know what the links are on YouTube. They're this long. So just go and search the Stone and Tile Show and you'll find it.
Okay. And then that's something separate than your podcast then?
Yes, it's something totally different.
Very cool. Very cool. All right, Fred. Well, I truly appreciate your time.
Oh, it was fun. I love it.
Thank you for sharing.
All right. Take care, Luke.